Right. So getting back, so where do systems start? Obviously, this is going to be a big undertaking for our systems, but they may have really good records on the water system side. Maybe, maybe not. We're hearing different things. But now this whole customer portion, so they may not have anything, obviously, on the customer side of things. So trying to narrow down where to really start. And like we said, that records review is the very first piece of getting all the information that they're going to need to start to prepare their inventories. And we already went over all the records, and they are listed in the workbook as well. Everything that Sabrina had gone over earlier, just as a starting point, but obviously their distribution mapping, some of the things that they already have on hand to get this ball rolling. The other portion, like we mentioned, the customer side. So what are water systems going to do? How are they going to get this information? Potentially getting that customer involved in the whole process, putting out potential customer survey, whether it be in a mailing insert and so forth, relying on them to maybe get back with the system with what is their line coming into their home? What is it made of? It does provide current information, and it could rely on the customer for some of that help. Obviously, the limited access is a problem. Not very many homeowners may want somebody else in there to look at their basement where the water line comes in. However, it does only represent that part of that service line that is visible as it comes into the building. So some things to keep in mind. There was a really good example in the EPA guidance document of a system that utilized this customer outreach approach in saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the lead in our utility, and we need your help to do that. So could you please call our system back so we can schedule a time to come in and inspect your water line coming into your home? This is a system that wants to get eyes on the material, to take a look at where the meter is, where the service line is coming into the home. EPA has also developed the Protect Your Tap, a quick check for lead. So some of this work has already been done for, so that the water system would not have to do this legwork. They can point customers to this website and then walk through those questions that have been developed. And they have, questions and pictures, to identify what is my water line versus my sewer line and so forth. And then walks them through that scratcher magnet test to determine whether or not they do in fact have a lead line coming into their home. So, just as a review for our systems, going over that scratch and magnet test, if it's a lead line, the magnet's not going to stick. Galvanized, the magnet will stick, and then your copper colored, obviously, would be the identifier. And just a reminder that, customers are maybe have to prep that line a little bit before they do those. Some of these homeowners may have painted lines, so they really can't tell what the original color of that service line might have been, and so forth. Another thing is just this quick check. Maybe people are familiar with this and testing the paint on older apartments and homes and so forth to see whether or not the paint had lead. But you could also use these quick swabs to test the exterior portion of that service line as well. If it turns red, it's lead. So utilizing some of those things. Obviously, if you are going to compile any of that, getting that customer survey information back so you can prioritize where you want to do your inspections, what sections of your system, it's coming back as definite lead, or, you want to go and investigate. Having somebody to track and record those responses from the water system and take and handle those calls. But also here in Pennsylvania, we would say that if the customer isn't going to allow the water system into the home to get that inspection themselves, that the water system at least require them to take photographs. And it's got to be a photograph that, they can definitely tell whether or not, what the material is. So it's got to be a good quality photograph, whether it's with the magnet sticking or not, that kind of thing. Something that they can do that evaluation from the water system side and not just rely on what the customer is saying. We've already touched on this about interviewing people, when a water system has all that historical knowledge go with people that have been retiring and so forth. They may want to, kind of interview either existing personnel or those that have all that knowledge base of, what in fact the material of their service lines were. So trying to get that information at the water system level, talking to those people. But on the customer side, they may actually want to interview the local plumbers in the areas and the local plumbing unions. Those are the people that had done the work, and what kind of records does the plumbers that have done work in that municipality, in that system, what kind of records do they have inspection wise when they installed the lines? So they may have a good knowledge base on that customer side, because obviously they charge to do work at that particular customer. So they might have billing records and so forth, and they can say, yeah, we installed this is what we charge for. So that might be a good outlet too, to kind of reach out to some of those plumbers that have worked in the water system. And then also maybe neighboring water systems to try to get the practices at the time during that time frame or whatever. They could gain some knowledge as well to fill in some of the gaps in their inventory. Obviously, things to consider when compiling all this, we want the water systems to know that they're going to have they're going to have personnel to read through these records, compile the records, where were they located? Can they gain access to them? How to read them? Where can they glean this knowledge? And if it is something that they may have to go to tax records and so forth, do they have a working relationship with somebody at the local tax office in the municipality, or do they have the access to the tax maps that they can just go in, click on the area that they want, the parcel that they want, and glean that information from there? Scanning the paper records that a water system might have and digitizing them so that they can go back later and do more research, or when they're doing the inventory and kind of bouncing what they have back and forth, it's much easier to do that from a database versus going to a file cabinet and so forth. So getting those things done, and they may have to rely on outside sourcing to do that type of work as well. We've already mentioned documentation, making sure that the entire staff is on board with this so that the distribution folks and the people that are actually preparing the inventory are talking hand in hand as what they need for this project. So when their workers are out identifying things or doing meter readings or doing new repairs, installations, they can double check what they have in their inventory and update accordingly. So making sure they're documenting things along the way together as a group. And then also GIS. And, some of our water systems definitely already have a lot of their assets GIS. Maybe they already have the information that they may need. And then two, this could be a time where they actually do go through their system and maybe do some mapping. Since they're doing all this, it might be a time to do that work as well. And it just puts a visual on where they're at in the whole process if they're doing that mapping at the same time. This was just a kind of a excerpt from the lead service line replacement collaborative, kind of where to begin for a system, when was their community built, and had it been after the state implemented the Drinking Water Lead Ban Act. So on the federal level, the Lead Ban Act went in effect in 1986. However, in Pennsylvania, what date was this? So the date we focus on here in Pennsylvania is January of 1991. So 1991 would be our cutoff date where our focus would be of the service lines that were installed prior to 1991. Now, ultimately, in the inventory, we have to identify all of our service lines in the material, but again, the focus of the system, we are looking towards those that were in place before 1991. Again, some of the hurdles that our water systems are going to have, obviously lack of resources, not enough people to do this work. This whole, now we have to know not only the system side, but now the customer side of that service line, and having that limited accessibility where customers may not allow them in to take a look at the line or even to verify service line materials. So those are our hurdles. And now we're going to move on to methods to identify our service lines. So some of the methods that we talk about during our trainings then is the visual field inspections, the camera curb box inspections, the CCTV internal pipe scope inspections, potholing or vacuum excavations, and then targeted service line sampling. So just to go through these real quick. Our visual inspections, like we said, if they can get access into that building, seeing where that service line is coming in, and being able to identify a lead line with a characteristic wipe joint. So in the picture on the left, we have lead, and on the right, we have a copper line coming into a home. The city of Pittsburgh did a lot of work with the camera curb box inspections. So they took a look at their curb box, which is right here, that hollow tube that leads to the shutoff valve. At that point, they can take cameras down inside once they clear everything out, and they can visually see the exterior portion of not only the water system side, but then also the customer side. So here we just have a cutaway. So being able to take cameras down there and seeing the water system side at that point and the customer side. Again, just a narrow vision there. And then what Pittsburgh did is they took that information and they put it through their mapping so that they could then tell what portions of the service lines were what materials. And so you can go to Pittsburgh website and you can see their mapping, and you click on an address and it pulls everything up. So that's a good use of that. Some of the hurdles that Pittsburgh had was actually finding the curb boxes at some of the locations and then being able to clean them out. And then also some of the imagery might not have been clear enough to make those identifications. So here we have the cameras going down into the curb box, and then the visuals coming back to be identified for later. And some of those examples were also in the EPA guidance document. And these are just photos out of that document from Pittsburgh, a lead service line on the left, non-lead service line in the middle. And then again, like I said, some of the imagery, they couldn't determine what the makeup was. And then some systems, like the city of Tucson, Arizona, they used closed circuit television inspections internally for their water service lines. With this, you can, obviously you would have to shut the water off and go in through the meter in order to do this, taking a camera, and you can see more of the service line versus just points here and there. So that is a benefit of the internal inspection. The negative, however, is that our systems that have corrosion control treatment on, obviously if they have their scale build up, they wouldn't be able to necessarily see the makeup of the pipe itself. They would be seeing the inside of the scales and so forth. Or if they have any kind of corrosion on the inside of the pipe, they might not be able to identify the material makeup. With our potholing and vacuum excavation, we're taking high pressure air or water and removing the soil so that then you could see the external portion of the service line itself. This is a faster and cheaper way than excavating the entire service line. Of course, you would want to identify those points along that service line, both for other utilities in the area, but also you want to make sure that you capture the entirety of the service line, the makeup of those portions. And here's just a graphic, the pros and cons of test pit methods, both using manual excavation, hand digging tools versus the vacuum excavation. With the vacuum excavation, obviously it could be faster and less disruptive in the footprint of that size hole that you would need in order to determine, get cameras down in there, take pictures to identify the exterior portion of the service line. However, you do need specialized equipment for potholing and maybe specialized crews to run that. And both would potentially cause disturbance to that service line. The city of Flint used hydrovacing extensively in 2017 to try to speed up the process so they could identify where the lead it was within their system. So they did use hydrovacing, but what they saw then, once they were doing excavations, was that they were missing the splices. So beyond the shutoff valve, where they were one material close to the shutoff valve, where they were, and then there were splices further on where it was still lead on the service line. So they ceased hydrovacing and went to full excavations. Another tool that systems might want to do is targeted service line sampling, where we're just doing lead sampling, water sampling, flushed or fifth draw, or sometimes sequential sampling. We want to know the water quality of the service line itself, not the premise plumbing. So these samples are not compliance monitoring. These are separate targeted service line samples to identify whether or not they have a lead or galvanized requiring replacement service line. So for each of the systems, this is going to be different to try to get a background threshold level, if you will. So if a system, depending on what corrosion control treatment they may have, they will have to do a sampling to know water quality from a service line that's definitely a lead service line and get that background threshold. Some of the water systems that have used this sampling, they might say greater than 5 micrograms per liter as their cutoff for their target. Anything above that would be considered a lead or galvanized service line, or galvanized requiring replacement service line. So again, that's going to be different for all systems to get that background threshold level of what they, for their particular system. Also, each service line would have a different volume depending on the premise plumbing. Where is our volume? So which liter do I need to sample to get that specific service line is going to change for each individual property. And this type of targeted service line cannot be used to determine a non-lead service line. Again, just an example of what we mean by sequential monitoring, a first draw sample, and then the premise plumbing, and then these last couple liters are really what we want to capture with the service line, with these targeted service line samples. Again, the time of year would also have a play in this, because obviously we want systems, if they're entertaining doing any sort of this sampling, to do that during the warmer months of the year as well. If systems are choosing to do targeted service line samples, we just ask that they mark their chain of custodies as not reportable to DEP or use the S code for special sampling. However, if they do get a sample result greater than 15 parts per billion, we would ask that they contact DEP, just let their sanitary know that they're doing targeted service line samples, and then the sanitary will provide them information for that customer to do flushing and so forth to limit that lead intake. Computer modeling, predictive modeling, also another tool that systems may choose. Again, we see this mainly for our larger systems, compiling that data for their system, and as a starting point, they're making inferences of areas. So they have known areas potentially where they have lead service lines, and they're making inferences on the unknown areas of their system. With these models, they would also have to be updated. So as they're moving through their system and actually identifying their materials, we would want them to then feed that information back into the model so that they get the most accuracy out of that model as they're going through and verifying their materials as well. And then other methods to detect lead service lines. Again, there might be some other technology that will be available, hopefully. Some of this, you might have heard, the Water Research Foundation, lead pipe detection by electrical resistance. So all metals would have a different electrical resistance. So this could be potentially a way to identify that service line makeup without having to do excavation. So some more work and research in the works for this. So hopefully that's something that's on the horizon here. Another thing is passive sampling. So this, if they have a point of use filter put on, they're actually sampling that particular filter after it's on that particular tap for an extended period of, however many gallons they want run through that. And then the filter itself is tested for lead, not the water. In this case, it would be the actual filter is tested for total lead. And again, this is just another tool potentially for systems to identify whether or not they have a lead or galvanized requiring replacement line. Same thing though, that community would have to have specific thresholds developed out from sampling based on known lead service lines and sampling from non-lead service lines as well, just to get that background information as to what level. Again, if systems are looking at one of these other technologies that aren't on our spreadsheet currently, they should reach out to our tech services section. Our central office tech service section is looking into some of these other technologies as well. So if a system is kind of entertaining some of these other methods, or they hear something else that they're interested in, before deploying that in their system, they should reach out and make sure that that's a viable resolution that DEP is okay with. Just kind of summarize the water system's approach into doing their service line inventories. Again, trying to determine within their system that date when lead was last used in their system. So if they're going off of 1991, or if they had an ordinance in place that was earlier than that, then that may be their date. And then going through their records and doing their review, doing any on-site visualization that they can do, and then moving on to their field verification methods. And some of the resources that we put in the workbook as well, obviously reference to the guidance document and the web link that came out last August, where they can get more additional information. The Lead Service Line Replacement Collaborative has a lot of good information, so just giving them that web link as well, with other information on preparing inventories and communication resources. And then I also pointed to the ASWA website, and once they get to the ASWA website, they could also look up this the white paper that was done with asthma and blue conduit as just like kind of a lessons learned from Flint. And one of the lessons that I just pointed out in this is based on historical records alone, Flint had thought they had only 20% of lead in their system, but then after over 25,000 excavations, they realized that 51% of their service lines were actually lead. So records alone were not accurate.